Even if the Royals find a way to bring Michael Wacha back, are they going to need another starter through free agency? We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Well, we talked about it a little bit in last night's episode. I forgot to put it out on Twitter, but it's been uploaded since last night. You can go check it out. It's on bullpen options the Royals could be looking into. But for this episode, as we teased last night, we're going to be talking about starting pitchers in free agency. And we're even going to dive into if the Royals don't bring back Michael Wacha, which right now, I just get the growing sense that the Royals really want him back and Michael Wacha is happy here. And I don't see the Royals getting into a financial dispute with Michael Wacha. I think both sides are, going to be dealing in good faith. It's not like the Royals are going to try to take advantage of Michael Wacha. And I don't see Michael Wacha being that pitcher that's going to want way over the usual asking price for a mid-30s starter coming off a good season. But right now, if I were to give a guess, I think the Royals will work out something with Michael Wacha because I do believe, even though the qualifying offer would be, a nice payday for Michael Wacha, even if he took the player option, it's still a nice payday, but it's also a one-year deal. And Michael Wacha, at this point in his career, may be looking at a situation in which he wants to stay in one place for a couple of years. He doesn't want to have to uproot his family again and go sign elsewhere and then spend 3 more years there and then reevaluate down the road. I think right now he would be happy if the Royals gave him a 2 to 3 year deal. Now it comes back to, will the Royals give him a multiple year deal? And I do think it's more likely that the Royals would give him a 2-year deal than a 3-year deal. But you never know, right? Seth Lugo got a 3-year deal, and I thought nobody would give him that extra 3rd year, but the Royals were the one to do so. And Michael Wacha, he's not into his late 30s. He's just now reaching his mid-30s, and he's coming off a great season. And I've got no reason to believe that a severe regression is going to be happening. I think that Michael Wacha is somebody that if you got him for 2 more years, you still get a very good arm for your rotation. Not somebody that's going to win Cy Young awards, but, we're talking about a guy that gave you 160-plus innings last year, a 3.3 ERA. That would be absolutely fine to replicate in 2025, as everybody knows. But right now, I would say that Michael Wacha is going to be back. That's my gut feeling. Going into free agency, going into the offseason, I have a hunch that the Royals are going to work out some type of deal with Michael Wacha to keep him in Kansas City longer than just 2025. My guess would be a 2-year deal with maybe something a little bit more expensive than his previous deal. But I feel like J.J. Bacole and company are going to want to get that done because here's the reason why. At the end of the season press conference, which we've alluded to many a times in the first couple episodes of the week, that if Michael Wacha is not going to come back to Kansas City, JJ said, well, we'll have to go back into free agency and look how to replace him. So why not just take care of it right now, or at least in a couple of months, by giving the money to Michael Wacha that you would have had to give to somebody else out there that you may not know what they're going to give you in 2025. I think the Royals feel confident that Michael Wacha can give them close to what he gave this past season, and that's worth the money. That's worth the money to bring back a guy that's already comfortable with the coaching staff, that likes Kansas City, that's pitched to Salvador Perez and Freddie Fermin and not have to go roll the dice with somebody else out there. But if it got to that point and the Royals are going to be moving on from Michael Wacha, again, I just don't see it at this point in time. There are some options to go out there and replace Michael Wacha with. I mean, this starting pitching market, I feel like, is pretty top heavy. There's a lot of guys that are past their prime and, looking to get some 1-year deal to round out their career. I mean, Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer seem like two of those guys. They go sign a 1-year deal somewhere and get something done. That would be something I would find interesting. Max Scherzer has ties to Kansas City by pitching at Mizzou. Maybe you give him a 1-year deal. Now, the health concerns is always something to keep in mind, but if you wanted something cheaper than Michael Wacha, Max Scherzer would be an option to go out there and be your number 3, number 4 starter. You also could look into Charlie Morton, another guy that's going to be 41 before the beginning of next season, but seems to just get better with age. I'm not saying he'll have a great season at 41, and who knows how many innings he can throw at 41 years old, but a cheaper option than Michael Wacha and would be a 1-year deal. If you wanted to spend maybe around, if not a little bit more than what Michael Wacha would be getting, Jack Flaherty's an option. Of course, what he did for Detroit and then what he's done for the Dodgers in the postseason, that's another option I like. One sneaky one that I think is really intriguing is Shane Bieber. Shane Bieber missed the entire year, basically, and he's always had his ties to Cleveland. The Royals are very familiar with Shane Bieber. He won a Cy Young in the 2020 COVID year, but he'll be significantly cheaper than what he would have been pitching in 2024. We all know that. He would have been the number 1 guy in Cleveland's rotation, and maybe this Cleveland team would have been able to put up more of a fight in New York if Shane Bieber was in that rotation. But he'll be a free agent. He's going to get a lot of offers, in my opinion, but it's going to have to be a bounce back deal because he's got nothing on the books, basically, for 2024. So you're gambling that he recovers perfectly and he can be a frontline guy again. Or for Kansas City, he could be a number 3 behind Reagans and Lugo. So that's another guy you could look into. Probably the last option I would throw in here that would make sense for the Royals would be Yusei Kikuchi. He dominated the Royals this year. And I think the 2 starts that he tossed against Kansas City got a ton of swing and miss. His fastball was running up 98, 99 in Houston. And I do think nearing his age 34 season, like Wacha, you could be looking at a very similar type deal, if not a little bit cheaper. But again, I'm listing out all these names because that's what I think would be the most likely option if Michael Wacha is to test free agency and the Royals aren't going to counter with some sort of an offer. Now, as I teased in the opening parts of the show, I believe Michael Wacha is going to be back. And the question becomes, do you still add another starter if you have Cole Reagans, Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha, Brady Singer, Alec Marsh? I think the answer is a resounding yes. Because what was an issue for the Royals in around June and July? They didn't have a 6th starter. They tried it out with Daniel Lynch, but I'm under the impression that Daniel Lynch is going to be keeping that spot in the bullpen, and he's finally thriven for the first time in his career. And it's been out of the bullpen. He was a great piece for the Royals bullpen, even though he didn't throw in the postseason. But I don't want to have Daniel Lynch bouncing back and forth between the bullpen and the rotation, trying to make it work. I would rather Daniel Lynch just have a very successful year in 2025 pitching out of the bullpen. So who do you go after as your 6th starter? And that's where you have to be very, very careful with your money. You don't overpay for a 6th starter. Again, this is your swingman. This is the guy that's going to be in your bullpen. But if somebody goes down, it's an easy pencil-in option. You just bring that guy into the 4th or the 5th spot or the 3rd spot, and you continue to roll. And I think the best option, based on who's out there that I don't think you'd have to really overpay for, would be somebody like Michael Lorenzen. Now, Michael Lorenzen could look at what he did for the Royals in having a sub-2 ERA, but also got banged up and, appeared a little bit in the postseason. He could look at that and say, hey, somebody's going to give me a 1-year deal to be in the rotation, not be a 6th starter. Or, on the flip side, the Royals could consider Alec Marsh to be that guy. I said Alec Marsh should be a breakout candidate in yesterday's episode, but if Alec Marsh moves to the bullpen, he's kind of your long reliever hybrid guy. We'll sign Michael Lorenzen to be your number 5. And then you feel pretty good about Alec Marsh being your swing man, and you feel pretty good about your number 5 starter, who, again, is familiar with Kansas City. I think Michael Lorenzen would be another perfect option. I liked what he brought to Kansas City. He clearly figured out something with the pitching staff. I want to say it was his slider usage when he came over to Kansas City, and it worked out well for him. I don't know what the market's going to be for him right now. Nobody knows what the market's going to be for a lot of these guys, but I want people back, just a selfish reason. I would like people back to this team that are familiar with the staff, that know the catchers, that know the defense. And Michael Lorenzen, even though he was there for half a season, he knows what it's like to play for this team. And I think that he built up some sort of a relationship that maybe could be revisited here in the offseason and bringing him in as the number 5 starter, or the number 5 starter, or he could be the swingman if you want Alec Marsh to be that number 5 starter. But it all comes back to spending money on a 6 starter, and you don't want to overdo it. You probably don't want to go over, $6 or $7 million on a 1-year deal. So Michael Lorenzen could get closer to 10 because he was good for the Royals, but we'll have to see how that all plays out and how they could view that 5th spot in Kansas City coming up in the winter. All right, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, is there anybody to trade on the big league roster and in the minor league system to bolster the 2025 club? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I am your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor and our title sponsor in Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today, because Prize Picks also invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And Prize Picks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When your picks hit, you can get the money in as quick as 15 minutes. So sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. So download that app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly on your first $5 lineup over at Prize Picks. This goes back to our episode on Monday about, or maybe it was Tuesday. I get some of the episodes mixed up. But talking about the leadoff hitter, that's what I'll just refer to it. And I said that I think it is a better route to trade for a leadoff hitter that might have a few years of control than try to find somebody through free agency, because I expressed that I don't believe the market is really that strong for a leadoff hitter. You could sign somebody to be your leadoff hitter, but they might not be the traditional leadoff hitter. So in entertaining those trade options, I'm not necessarily going to pick a team that I think makes the most sense, because if you're trading prospects, everybody's taking prospects. You don't trade somebody from your minor league system because that's a team need for somebody else. They just want depth. They want more talent in their minor league system, and you could capitalize on a team that is going to be rebuilding in 2025. But to kick things off at the major league level, I think the trade options go as is. I think Brady Singer is a trade option. Do I think a trade is going to happen? Not at this point in time, but I do feel like conversations are going to be had around winter meetings, just because that's been entertained over the last year and a half. They were entertaining a Brady Singer trade back in 2023. And now that he's got a very good season under his belt, you could look at a team that's trying to get over the hump, that views the Royals as the team that found a way to get over the hump with their rotation, and you capitalize on sending Brady Singer somewhere to be a number 3 or number 4, and you could get a leadoff hitter in return. So he's near the top of that list because I think he's got the most trade value. Of course, a starting pitcher with a year of control, that's always going to play well in the trade market. The second option here at the major league level is going to be Carlos Hernandez. I'll count him on the major league roster because before the postseason, he was on the major league roster, but I'm going to consider him to be one here. I don't think the return would be that high, but you could maybe get another major leaguer, a bench piece, because you're going to be losing Adam Frazier. You're going to be losing Garrett Hampson. You're going to be losing Robbie Grossman, Yuli Gurriel, Tommy Pham. You're going to need some bench bats. And I think that you could flip Carlos Hernandez for a bench bat and maybe another utility guy that could be an upgrade over Adam Frazier or Garrett Hampson. And the reason I think Carlos Hernandez is a trade piece and why the Royals would be willing to move on from him is that Steven Cruz is a better version of Carlos Hernandez, and he's younger and has more years of control. So maybe you could look at Steven Cruz and say, hey, there's better trade value there. We'll keep Carlos Hernandez and try to get Steven Cruz somebody in return or get a player in return for Steven Cruz. But to me, I think that Steven Cruz can be a big piece in this bullpen in 2025. The stuff was great this year. Didn't throw many innings, but I think only allowed one base runner in about 6 or 7 outings. He was using his cutter more. He's got high velocity. Command was better. Carlos Hernandez, the stuff was better once he got recalled, but still, I think the fastball is very hittable, and you might be able to entice somebody like a Miami, like an Oakland, like a Colorado who likes the velocity and say, okay, well, we'll take Carlos Hernandez. We need a piece for our big league bullpen, and we'll flip somebody in return to give you a bench bat or something like that. The third option, I'm going to go down to the minor league level here, and I don't think it's too much of a surprise. I'll package these two guys together. The Drew Waters and Nick Pratto. I don't think either of those guys have a future in Kansas City. When I look at this roster right now, they could be a fourth outfielder. They could be a bench bat, but I just don't think that it's going to work out, nor is it something that I believe those players want. I think those guys want to go start somewhere. That kind of goes without saying. It's obvious that guys that have been stuck in the minor league level, and for one of those guys hitting pretty well, you want to get your chance somewhere else. And I think Drew Waters could be one of those guys that you try to get maybe another minor leaguer for. I would always try to go and find pitching because the Royals can find pitching and find value out of those guys when flipping hitters at the minor league level. But Drew Waters and Nick Pratto, they feel like they're in that in-between, right? They feel like the guys that can't really stick at the major league level, and they're too good for AAA. So they're in that in-between. And to me, I call it like baseball purgatory, right? You're just bouncing in between the big league level and AAA, and there's no real spot for you. So I feel like the Royals could honor them a little bit and say, hey, we'll give you a chance to go compete elsewhere, probably for a team that just isn't very good, and maybe they want to unload a reliever to get a younger player with years of control in return. So I'll put them right on that list of guys that I think would make sense to trade going into 2025. And then the fourth option, I want to be very careful at how I approach this because I'm not meaning that all of them have the same trade value and all of them are likely to be traded because that's just not the case. But the Royals have 3 young catchers in their minor league system: Blake Mitchell, Carter Jensen, and Ramon Ramirez. Those 3 guys are considered to be, the prize prospects at really any position down there at the minor league level. Blake Mitchell has the best upside of the bunch. Carter Jensen is the closest, and Ramon Ramirez is still a long shot, but tore it up at the lower levels of the Royals minor league system. But you look at the likelihood of all 3 of them making it and all 3 of them playing catcher, it's not a very high chance of doing so. So in my opinion, though you may like all 3 prospects, I think you have to pick 2 and trade the other. You always can have the depth, and maybe that's what the Royals scouts in the front office are looking at with the catching position because Salvador Perez isn't going to play forever. Let's see how many young guys we can build up at the minor league level and, just feel comfortable about that position because it's a big position to replace. Salvador Perez is a key part of this organization, of this city, but we also know he's not going to be the catcher 5 years from now. They're going to need somebody to take that spot from him, whether that be Blake Mitchell, Carter Jensen, or Ramon Ramirez. But to me, I think you need to pick 2 and be realistic about what those 2 guys are going to bring. Even with Blake Mitchell and Carter Jensen, they're both not going to be on the major league roster as catchers, right? Because those are 2 high-ranking prospects in your system. Somebody's got to move. If you want that guy to play every single day, he can't be a backup catcher. So I think the Royals can look at, Blake Mitchell being their catcher of the future because I think his defense is better. I talked to Carter Jensen in spring training months ago, and he said, I'll play wherever they tell me to play. And so that tells me, this guy could go out to the outfield, learn third base, learn first base. And that's something that is always great to have at the prospect. And it's not that Blake Mitchell wouldn't do that. I think he would, but he wasn't there in spring training, and I didn't get a chance to talk to him. But with Carter Jensen, if he can move around and Blake Mitchell can be behind the plate, well, Ramon Ramirez is still a long shot. And I kind of look at the deal that the Royals made last year for John Schreiber and flipping David Sandlin, though a little bit older of a prospect. Ramon Ramirez could be one of those guys where you're looking for bullpen help. Maybe you're looking for a swing man in the rotation or another bench bat. Probably not a bench bat, because I don't think you want to trade a good prospect like that for a guy who's not going to play a lot or pitch a lot. But I think you got to pick two of those catchers and try to get value out of the third, because the likelihood of all three of those guys getting to the big league level in Kansas City, being a good catcher and being a good big leaguer, are just very low. That's the odds you play with prospects. They're not all going to work out. And the Royals had the luxury of having three really good catchers in their minor league system. So if you're going to get some value for a big league pitcher or a big league starter, maybe you could look into flipping one of those catchers. And I would think the Royals wouldn't want to do that with Blake Mitchell and Carter Jensen. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, I'm going to give my reasons as to why Kris Bubic should stay in the bullpen and not move to the rotation in 2025. That's all coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to one of our newer sponsors for the show, in Hims. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis, and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option. If prescribed, your medication ships directly to you. And discreet packaging for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Start your free online visit at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. There's been a couple of questions that have, popped up after the conclusion of the season last week. Kyle Wright being one of them. We talked about him in an episode earlier this week. What they're going to do with MJ Melendez and Hunter Renfroe and Michael Garcia. Those have popped up. And another one that's been pretty frequent is Kris Bubic and what the Royals should do with their newfound setup man. And I think that the answer is pretty clear. And this is going to upset a few people, because I think that there are folks out there that believe the bullpen success can translate to the rotation. And if you got Cole Reagan, Seth Lugo, Michael Wacha, and Kris Bubic, man, I mean, that rotation could be much better than what you saw in 2024. But I think you take this a different route. And again, I do see the reasons why you would move Kris Bubic to the rotation, because it would open up a spot in the bullpen. And who knows? We talked about bullpen options yesterday, Kirby Yates being one of them. What if you had Lucas Erceg and Kirby Yates combo at the back end of the bullpen? You feel pretty good about that. And if Kris Bubic can replicate what he did in the bullpen, but in the rotation, man, you really made the right move there. But I don't think it's that simple. And I think a lot of people would say the likelihood of that type of success in the bullpen in a one-inning workload translating to expecting 5-6 innings out of Kris Bubic every fifth day is just not likely. It's not something that I believe would happen, and would happen seamlessly. Yes, I think Kris Bubic could make that transition. I'm not going to rule it out. Maybe there's a world in which they view Kris Bubic as their number 5 starter, and they've got somebody on their mind of being their setup guy. Maybe they view Hunter Harvey as being the 8th inning guy and not Kris Bubic. But I look at Kris Bubic the same way I look at Daniel Lynch, and here's my reasons. These two guys experienced long-term success for the first time in their big leagues career this year. Daniel Lynch, a much smaller sample size, but his, a 17, 18 inning scoreless streak since returning from Omaha at the end of August, that gave him hope in his big league career for the first time, I think, ever in his professional career, because it showed that he wasn't just good at what he did. He was one of the best in the bullpen, and he looked comfortable there, and he threw strikes, and his stuff looked good. And you could look at that long-term outcome of, hey, Daniel Lynch isn't just good for the 2024 Royals. He could be a big factor for the bullpen in 2025. And Kris Bubic, in a bigger sample size and a much larger role, and even in the postseason, he showcased that, hey, I can do this very successfully. I have underlying numbers that look great. The analytics tell me that I am an above average back end arm. I throw strikes. That's huge for the back end of the bullpen. I've got the swing and miss. I can handle the pressure, throwing 2 innings at Yankee Stadium in the ALDS, pitching late in the game and a clincher in game 2 in Baltimore. He basically got slid into the 8th inning role, and you trusted 2 guys in the back end of that bullpen, and it was Erceg and it was Bubic. I don't think you mess with that. I really don't. I think Kris Bubic has found his role, has found his future at the big league level. And I think that what he showed in 2024 is going to be replicated at the back end of the bullpen in 2025. And he's going to be built up throughout the offseason, throughout spring training, where, we saw in 2024, if he threw on a Friday, he may not pitch till Sunday. Or if he threw on a Monday, he may not get in till Thursday, because the Royals just weren't too keen on giving him multiple innings, or if he went multiple innings, he was going to be out a couple of games. You're going to look at Kris Bubic in 2025 like you do Lucas Erceg. Hey, if we've got a lead late, we want to be able to turn it over to those 2 guys. We want to be able to turn it over to the back end of our bullpen that can lock things down. And I think knowing that Kris Bubic can be a part of that and can be a trustworthy guy, it's much more unknown if he can do that in the rotation in 2025. No, he was good in 2023 to begin the year. I think he was the Royals' best starter at the beginning part of April, and then he got hurt. And I just think right now you go, I know he can be a good, if not a great bullpen arm. He might be a good starter. But again, you're not even looking at Kris Bubic to be the number 1 or number 2 or even number 3 for that matter. You'd be looking at him to be a number 4 or number 5. So I ask you the value. What's more important, a good setup man or a good number 4, number 5 starter? To me, it would be the setup guy. There could be people commenting and say, no, I think having a solidified rotation is the most important. But with the bullpen issues the Royals had for the majority of that year, I think having a lockdown 7th, 8th, and 9th inning guy is far more important than having a good number 4, number 5 starter. I just like what I saw from Kris Bubic, and I think the Royals love what they saw from Kris Bubic. And I don't think you mess with that. I don't think you mess with Daniel Lynch with where he was at. You've been gifted this resurgence of guys that you didn't think were going to be in the big leagues much longer. At least I think a lot of people would say that back in 2022 or early 2023. I mean, if you would have said Kris Bubic after he got Tommy John, a year later, or we would say probably more so a year and a half later, was pitching in the 8th inning of a postseason run for the Royals, everybody would have called you crazy. If somebody would have said late in 2023 that Daniel Lynch would have a 20-inning scoreless streak and a playoff push in September, you would have been called crazy. So you've been blessed with this resurgence of their careers, and now you feel good about where they're at. And for me, I don't want to mess with that. I don't want to screw around with moving those guys back to the rotation. I would much rather spend money on bringing Michael Wacha back. You got 1, 2, 3 right there. If you flip Brady Singer, all right, Alec Marsh becomes the 4. You sign Michael Lorenzen to be the 5. Then you have Bubic as the 8th inning guy. Daniel Lynch is in that bullpen. I think it all just works out pretty well. I think that, you just don't want to screw with that. And this goes with Kyle Wright as well. If Kyle Wright finds success in the bullpen, I'm not going to look at that and say, well, now they should try him out in the rotation because he looks good. It may be that he just looks good in a 1-inning workload or a 2-inning workload. It's tough to pick up what Kyle Wright has when only 6 or 7 batters get to face him. Right? For Kris Bubic, it's hard to pick him up when he's only facing 3 batters or he's only facing 4 guys. It might be easier to pick up that stuff when, 9 guys get to see him twice or 3 times. So I'm not going to mess with it. That's my take. I think Kris Bubic should stay in the bullpen because I value the back end of that bullpen a hell of a lot more than I do the last two spots in the starting rotation. Okay, that's going to do it for us on another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every aspect of the playoff picture. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, we're going to have an early edition of a Mailbag Friday, so get your questions all ready. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.